This is Alex Mercer. You're listening to a late-night radio broadcast meant for those who are still paying attention. The first mistake humanity made was assuming that contact would be obvious, that if something from beyond Earth ever noticed us, it would arrive with spectacle, light tearing through the sky, sound shaking the ground, something undeniable and cinematic. But the universe doesn't owe us drama. What it gave us instead was precision. A signal so clean, so deliberate, that it unsettled the scientists who first encountered it more than any explosion ever could. It didn't scream across the cosmos. It whispered patiently, repeating itself with mathematical discipline, refining its structure each time it returned, correcting for distance and interference as if it were learning. That's when the fear set in. Because learning implies intent, and intent implies decision. At first, the world wasn't told, not because of conspiracy, but because disbelief is powerful. Researchers argued, committees formed, alternative explanations were exhausted one by one. Natural phenomena failed to fit. Instrument error failed to explain consistency. The signal behaved like something that expected to be heard, even if it never expected an answer. When analysts mapped its structure, they didn't find language or emotion. They found geometry, spatial references, ratios that aligned with physical constants. It wasn't saying hello, it was measuring, mapping, assessing. And the most disturbing conclusion emerged slowly, reluctantly. This wasn't communication. It was observation. The moment that realization took hold, the signal changed. Not dramatically, just enough to confirm suspicion. Its repetition adjusted, narrowing focus, shifting frequencies, as if compensating for atmospheric interference. Earth wasn't just a point in space anymore. It was a target of attention. Somewhere, something had noticed us, and it was no longer gathering general data. It was gathering specific data about distance, about density, about movement, about us. And while humanity was still debating whether to be afraid, the sky itself began to go quiet. Satellites don't vanish all at once. They fail in stages, like nerves going numb before pain arrives. A weather satellite stops transmitting. Engineers reroute signals. Then a navigation satellite drifts off course. Then communication relays blink out in clusters, not randomly, but geographically. Entire orbital paths become unreliable. Space agencies scramble to diagnose, but every explanation feels hollow. Solar activity doesn't match. Debris patterns don't align. The failures don't spread outward. They move inward. From deep space toward Earth. Probes that have spoken to us for decades. Silent. Instruments that have watched the edges of the solar system. Dark. Telescopes aimed at distant galaxies return static. Then nothing at all. It's not destruction. There are no explosions, no debris fields, just absence. As if something passed through and erased their ability to speak. As if observation itself was being disabled. This is when the tone changes behind closed doors. Emergency meetings aren't called press conferences. Data access becomes restricted. Live streams quietly end. Astronomers are instructed not to speculate publicly. Not because answers exist, but because questions are becoming dangerous. The sky, once humanity's greatest comfort, begins to feel crowded, watched, claustrophobic. People feel it before they understand it. GPS glitches last longer than usual. Satellite imagery shows gaps that shouldn't exist. Communication delays stack up. Weather forecasts lose precision. News anchors stumble over explanations that sound rehearsed, but incomplete. The public doesn't panic. Not yet. Panic requires certainty. What spreads instead is unease. That instinctive sense that something fundamental has shifted, even if no one can name it. And through all of this, the signal continues. It repeats, it refines, it waits. Which tells us something terrifying. Whatever sent it isn't finished learning. It hasn't acted yet. It's still deciding, still watching a planet that hasn't even agreed on what this moment means. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting into a world that may already be under observation. If you're listening, remember this. History doesn't always begin with invasion. Sometimes it begins with silence and the slow realization that we are no longer alone and no longer unseen. This is Alex Mercer. You're still tuned to the frequency, and that matters more than you think. For months, astronomers told themselves the math must be wrong, that the models needed refinement, that space is vast, strange, and full of exceptions. But there comes a moment in every scientific mystery when denial stops being responsible. That moment arrived when objects began appearing beyond Neptune, points of presence where nothing should have been. They weren't comets. Comets announced themselves with fire and dust, with predictable arcs shaped by gravity and heat. These objects did neither. They were cold, dark, absorbing light instead of reflecting it. And most unsettling of all, they moved in ways that refused to be forecast. Orbital simulations broke down. Predictive models contradicted one another. The objects weren't obeying the rules because they weren't drifting. They were navigating. At first, their speed confused analysts. Too slow to be natural debris flung inward by gravity. Too deliberate to be random. They lingered, adjusted, changed vectors without external force. In space, that's a sentence with only one ending. Movement without cause implies control. Control implies intelligence, and intelligence implies purpose. These weren't arrivals, they were approaches. Silent, patient, methodical. No heat signatures, no propulsion plumes. Nothing that could be easily tracked or targeted. Just mass, direction, and intent wrapped in a kind of darkness that instruments struggled to interpret. It was as if the objects were designed not just to move, but to avoid being understood. What truly frightened scientists wasn't their number, but their spacing. These objects weren't clustered. They were distributed, positioned like pieces on a board, each occupying a calculated distance from the next. Too precise to be coincidence, too restrained to be accidental. They weren't rushing toward Earth. They weren't orbiting the sun. They were positioning themselves, as if preparing for something that required patience rather than speed. That realization sent a quiet shock through observatories around the world. Because patience is not a human instinct in crisis, but it is a strategic one. Behind the scenes, the language changed. Not publicly, not yet. But internally, memos stopped using the word unknown and started using the word unmodeled. Then that word disappeared too, because unmodeled implies solvable, and this wasn't. Scientists began speaking in probabilities rather than predictions. Risk assessments replaced forecasts. The question was no longer, what are they? But when do they act? And more chilling still, what phase are we currently in? While the public continued living beneath ordinary skies, Governments quietly adjusted their posture. This is how you know something real has entered the room. Not with announcements, but with protocol. Military briefings grew shorter, more compartmentalized. Airspace restrictions expanded outward, not inward, as if preparing for something descending rather than rising. Radar systems began reporting shapes that appeared for seconds, sometimes less, then vanished without breaking sound barriers, without heat trails, without explanation. Objects that seemed to acknowledge detection and then choose to leave it behind. Officials avoided naming the threat because naming creates expectation. Expectation creates panic. So instead, they spoke of readiness, of contingencies, of resilience. Continuity of government plans, documents designed for the unthinkable, were reviewed, updated, quietly activated. Not because disaster had arrived, but because the margin for response was shrinking. Secure facilities increased staffing. Emergency broadcast systems were tested more frequently. Satellites were repositioned defensively, not strategically. None of this made headlines. It wasn't meant to. What's most unsettling is what didn't happen. There were no demands, no messages, no warnings. Nothing that could be misinterpreted as negotiation or communication. The objects didn't accelerate. They didn't retreat. They simply continued existing within our solar system, as if they belonged there. As if borders, ownership, and permission were irrelevant concepts. And perhaps they are. Perhaps what we're witnessing isn't an invasion at all, but a transition from being alone to being observed up close. Language is a fragile thing in moments like this. Governments stopped using the word anomaly because anomalies are temporary. They're glitches, errors, outliers. What's happening now is consistent, persistent, intentional. And intent is the one variable humanity has never been able to control once it arrives from outside itself. You can negotiate with a nation. You can deter an enemy. But how do you reason with something that hasn't spoken and may never need to? People will ask later why there was no single moment of warning. No day when the sky cracked open and everyone looked up together. The answer is simple and terrifying. Because this didn't begin with spectacle. It began with quiet repositioning, with absence where instruments once spoke, with objects that didn't announce arrival because they didn't need to. They were already here, just not where we expected to look. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting into a silence that is growing heavier by the hour. If you're listening, understand this. The most dangerous phase of any invasion isn't the attack. It's the moment when the observers finish observing and decide what comes next. Across the world, people stepped outside for reasons they still can't explain. Some said the air felt different. Others said the night felt louder, even in silence. And then it happened. Something so subtle that it took seconds for the human mind to accept it as real. The stars were wrong. Not gone. Not hidden. Rearranged. Familiar constellations, patterns memorized since childhood, stretched, bent, and briefly distorted, as if the sky itself was being adjusted by unseen hands. Points of light moved against the fixed backdrop of the cosmos, not streaking like meteors, not blinking like aircraft, but gliding with intention. There were no sonic booms, no trails, no explosions, just motion where motion should not exist. And in that moment, millions of people felt the same cold realization settle into their bones. This was not a natural event. This was presence. Reports poured in from cities, deserts, coastlines, and rural fields, places with no connection to one another except the sky above them. People described lights shifting positions relative to the stars, as if the heavens were being quietly reorganized. Some said the movement lasted only seconds. Others swore it went on for minutes. Telescopes captured fragments. Cameras struggled. Sensors recorded inconsistencies they couldn't explain. The stars themselves hadn't moved, but something between them had. And whatever it was, it understood perspective, scale, and visibility far better than we understood it. The invasion, if that's what this is, did not arrive with force. It arrived with restraint. What made the night truly unbearable wasn't fear, it was precision. These lights didn't wander. They didn't explore randomly. They repositioned, like units taking formation, like instruments aligning for measurement. The sky felt surveyed, not threatened, observed, not attacked. And that distinction mattered more than anyone wanted to admit. Because violence suggests urgency. Deliberation suggests confidence. Whatever rearranged the night sky didn't need to rush. It didn't need to impress. It didn't need to announce itself. It moved as if time itself was an ally. By morning, authorities attempted explanations that collapsed under scrutiny. Atmospheric anomalies, optical illusions, rare astronomical effects. But explanations fell apart when the reports aligned too cleanly, when independent witnesses described identical movements from different hemispheres, when instruments built for unrelated purposes recorded the same disturbances. This wasn't mass hallucination. This wasn't misinterpretation. This was coordination. And coordination implies command. Then came the second realization. Quieter, heavier, far more disturbing. There was no message, no broadcast, no signal, no attempt at communication. Humanity had spent decades preparing for first contact, exchange, language, symbols, mathematics, peace offerings. We imagined greetings, warnings, demands. What we received instead was silence. The craft, if that word even applies, did not speak. They did not respond. They hovered beyond reach, observed, adjusted their positions, and continued operating as if human presence was a known variable, not a factor requiring discussion. This was not contact as we imagined it. This was contact as an acknowledgement, as if something had arrived not to meet us, but to proceed. The implication was chilling. Communication is something you do when you need cooperation, consent, or understanding. Silence suggests none of those are required. The realization spread quietly among scientists, military analysts, and leaders who understood the weight of it. Whatever is here does not need our permission. And worse, it may not even need our awareness. Around the world, people stared upward, waiting for something, anything, to happen next. A voice, a threat, a declaration. None came. The craft remained silent, their movements minimal, efficient, purposeful. They weren't scanning cities individually. They weren't reacting to crowds or panic. They weren't even reacting to attempts at observation. It was as if their focus was larger than us, as if Earth itself was the subject, and humanity merely part of the terrain. Fear didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in slowly, through the gaps where answers should have been. People asked the same questions over and over, hoping repetition would make them less terrifying. Why now? Why this way? Why no communication? And beneath those questions was the one no one wanted to voice. What phase comes after observation? History offered no comfort. Every species that has encountered a more advanced intelligence without understanding its intentions has paid a price. And intelligence that does not explain itself is rarely benign. The silence became its own form of pressure. It forced humanity to confront an unfamiliar position, not as explorers, not as discoverers, not as masters of our environment, but as something observed from above. For the first time in our history, we were not the ones watching the sky and wondering what lived there. We were the ones being watched, catalogued, assessed, possibly judged by criteria we cannot comprehend. Tonight, the stars are still there. The constellations look normal again, at least to the naked eye. But something fundamental has shifted. The sky is no longer just space, it's territory. And whatever moved through it last night did so without asking, without speaking, without revealing anything except this. Humanity is no longer alone, and whatever has arrived does not feel the need to explain itself. This is Alex Mercer, broadcasting as the night listens back. There are moments in history when the absence of sound is louder than any explosion. This was one of them. There are no explosions to replay, no single moment you can point to and say, this is when it started. Instead, there is a pattern emerging so quietly that many people don't recognize it as a pattern at all. Electricity is failing, but not everywhere, not randomly, not chaotically. The lights are going out in some places while remaining steady in others, and that selectivity is what makes this different from anything we've seen before. In one city, entire neighborhoods go dark without warning. In another, just a few miles away, power remains stable, uninterrupted, almost stubbornly normal. Office buildings glow while residential blocks fall silent. Streetlights blink out along major roads, yet homes behind them stay illuminated. The grid doesn't collapse, it withdraws. And it does so with a precision that unsettles the engineers watching it happen. At first, officials reach for familiar explanations: equipment failure, aging infrastructure, load imbalance, weather-related stress. But those explanations begin to fail as the pattern sharpens. Military installations report complete outages while surrounding civilian areas continue functioning. Secure facilities lose backup power simultaneously across different regions, even when their systems are isolated from public grids. Hospitals don't go dark entirely, but their power flickers, just long enough to be noticed, just long enough to cause concern, never long enough to justify full evacuation. It's as if something is touching the system lightly, deliberately, learning where the limits are. What's most disturbing is what doesn't happen. There is no cascading failure, no nationwide blackout, no overwhelming surge. The grid behaves as though it's being tested rather than attacked. Substations shut down, then come back online. Transmission lines drop load, then recover. Control rooms report commands they didn't issue, followed by data gaps they can't explain. Engineers describe the experience not as losing control, but as sharing it, briefly, unwillingly, and without knowing with whom. People notice in fragments. A city block goes dark for 10 minutes, then returns to normal. Elevators stall, then resume. Traffic lights fail at a single intersection, while the rest of the city flows uninterrupted. Social media fills with jokes at first. Power glitch. Must be the grid again. But beneath the humor is unease. Humans are comfortable with randomness. We are far less comfortable with intent we can't see. And then the sky closes. It doesn't happen all at once. No announcement is made. No global grounding order flashes across screens in a single moment. Instead, pilots begin reporting anomalies, small at first, easy to dismiss. Instruments behave strangely at altitude. Altimeters disagree with GPS. Gyroscopes drift despite recalibration. Autopilot systems disengage without warning, then re-engage as if nothing happened. Air traffic controllers hear confusion in voices they know well. Professionals trained to stay calm, describing conditions that don't fit any checklist. Flights are rerouted. Altitudes are adjusted. Engineers suspect software issues, solar interference, sensor malfunctions. But the reports continue, growing more consistent and harder to ignore. Above certain heights, the sky stops behaving predictably. Navigation becomes unreliable. Control surfaces respond with subtle delays. The atmosphere feels wrong, not turbulent, not violent, just uncooperative. Airspace closures begin regionally, then nationally, then globally. One by one, countries ground civilian aircraft, not because something is falling from the sky, but because something has changed within it. Commercial aviation halts not in panic, but in confusion. Planes sit idle on runways while technicians run diagnostics that reveal nothing conclusive. Everything works until it doesn't. And the point at which it doesn't is always above a certain altitude, always beyond a boundary humans once believed they understood. Military aviation fares no better. In some cases, it fares worse. Advanced aircraft report more severe anomalies. Stealth systems malfunction. Targeting data becomes unreliable. Secure communications degrade into static. Entire squadrons are grounded not by enemy fire, but by the realization that the sky itself can no longer be trusted. For the first time in modern history, humanity loses assured access to the air, not because it's contested, but because it's inaccessible. Satellites complicate the picture further. Some remain operational. Others fall silent. A few transmit corrupted data before disappearing entirely. Orbits remain stable, but signals distort. Timing errors propagate through systems that depend on precision measured in nanoseconds. Financial networks stumble. Communications lag. GPS accuracy degrades unevenly across the globe, forcing ships and vehicles to rely on older, less precise methods. The modern world begins to feel heavier, slower, less certain. What ties all of this together is restraint. Whatever is happening is not maximal. It is not optimized for destruction. Power still flows. Skies still exist. Systems still function, just not fully, not reliably, and not under exclusively human control. This isn't collapse. It's limitation. A demonstration, perhaps, of boundaries humanity didn't know could be enforced. Governments issue statements heavy with reassurance and light on specifics, out of an abundance of caution. Temporary measures. No indication of hostile intent. Those phrases repeat across broadcasts, translated into dozens of languages, carrying the same unspoken truth. No one is in charge of this situation. Coordination meetings stretch late into the night. Emergency protocols written for war, disaster, and cyber attack are reviewed and quietly set aside when none of them quite apply, and the public senses it. Not through headlines, but through absence. Flights vanish from tracking apps. Night skies grow quieter. Cities feel oddly grounded, as if the world's vertical dimension has been removed. People look up more often, noticing the stillness where contrails used to cross. The sky hasn't changed visually, but psychologically, it has closed. What unsettles experts most is the consistency of the limits. Power failures stop at certain thresholds. Aviation anomalies begin at specific altitudes. Satellite disruptions cluster in particular orbital bands. These are not chaotic outcomes. They are controlled variables. Someone, or something, appears to be learning what humanity depends on, and how far those dependencies can be bent without breaking everything at once. Tonight, as you listen, the world is still functioning. Lights are on in many homes. Hospitals are operating. Communications remain intact. But the assumption that humans command their systems has been quietly revoked. Control has become conditional. Access has become provisional. And the sky, once the symbol of limitless freedom, has become a ceiling. This is Alex Mercer. And if history teaches us anything, it's that the most dangerous moment is not when something is taken away violently, but when it is removed gently, selectively, and without explanation. Because that's when people argue about whether it's really happening at all. This is Alex Mercer, and tonight we need to talk about fear, real fear, not the kind that spreads through illness or poison or weaponized air, but the kind that arrives without touching the body at all. No one is coughing. No one is collapsing. Hospitals are not overwhelmed. There are no symptoms to chart, no pathogen to isolate, no enemy strain to name. And yet, across the world, people are afraid in a way that defies biology. This is fear without disease, panic without infection, a social fracture spreading faster than any virus ever could, precisely because there is nothing tangible to fight. It begins with absence, no attack, no release, no visible harm. The expected signs never come, and that's what unsettles people most. Humans are conditioned to fear things that do something. Explosions, sirens, casualties. Instead, there is presence, undeniable, impossible to ignore, and that presence does nothing at all. It simply exists. And in doing so, it destabilizes everything people thought they understood about safety. Psychologists notice it first. Emergency rooms begin seeing patients not for injury, but for anxiety so severe it mimics physical illness. Chest pain without cardiac cause, dizziness without neurological explanation, insomnia that stretches for days, the body reacting to a threat it cannot define, the mind searching for rules that no longer apply. Fear has always needed a shape. Tonight, it doesn't have one. Panic buying begins almost immediately, not because people know what they need, but because they feel they will need something. Shelves empty of essentials that make no strategic sense. Water, food, batteries, religious texts. Ammunition sells out in some regions, candles in others. The items vary, but the impulse is the same. Reclaim control through preparation, even if the preparation is meaningless. People don't ask what they're preparing for. They just prepare. Faith systems fracture under the weight of interpretation. Some see salvation. Others see judgment. Some declare this moment proof of divine intervention, while others insist it is a test of belief itself. Places of worship fill, then divide. Sermons grow louder, then contradictory. Old doctrines strain to absorb something that was never accounted for. When reality refuses to fit belief, belief begins to splinter. And then there are the worshipers, not metaphorical ones, literal ones. People who look at the presence and see intelligence, restraint, and power beyond human reach, and decide that resistance is pointless. Online communities form overnight. Symbols appear. Language shifts. They speak not of invasion, but of arrival. Not of fear, but of guidance. The idea that humanity has finally been seen and judged worthy of attention becomes comforting to those exhausted by uncertainty. Others go the opposite direction. Total denial, absolute rejection. They insist nothing has changed, that this is mass hysteria, psychological contagion amplified by media and algorithms. They demand proof that fits old frameworks and dismiss anything that doesn't. Videos are labeled fake. Data is declared manipulated. Witnesses are accused of exaggeration. To accept what is happening would mean admitting that human authority over reality itself is no longer exclusive, and for some, that is unbearable. Families fracture quietly. Dinner table conversations turn tense. One person believes, another refuses. A third is terrified but doesn't know why. Trust erodes not because of disagreement, but because no one can explain what they feel in a way that convinces anyone else. Fear becomes personal, private, isolating. People stop talking, not because they have nothing to say, but because language feels inadequate. And then the structures appear. They do not arrive dramatically. There is no descent through clouds, no sonic announcement, no landing that can be captured cleanly on a single camera. They are simply there, massive forms occupying space where nothing occupied it before. Over oceans, over deserts, over uninhabited regions humanity once ignored. They choose emptiness deliberately, as if to avoid accusation, as if to say, "We are not here to destroy you." From a distance, they are difficult to describe. Not ships, not buildings, not machines in any human sense. Geometry that feels intentional but unfamiliar. Surfaces that absorb light strangely. Edges that seem too precise to be natural and too smooth to be manufactured by any known process. They hover without visible propulsion, unmoved by wind, weather, or gravity in ways that defy expectation. They are not hidden. They are not aggressive. They are unmistakably present, and they watch. Cities are not attacked. Streets are not flooded. Power does not immediately fail. Instead, movement is observed. Traffic patterns, pedestrian flow, emergency responses, digital communication spikes, human behavior under stress. The structures do not focus on landmarks or centers of power. They focus on life, where people gather, how they disperse, how long panic lasts, how order reasserts itself, or doesn't. Communications begin to feel porous. Messages arrive late. Calls drop selectively. Encryption holds, then doesn't. Data isn't stolen. It's mirrored. Analysts realize that conversations aren't being intercepted for content alone, but for cadence, emotion, frequency. The way humans communicate seems as important as what they say. Humanity begins to understand that it is not being targeted, it is being studied. Governments demand answers they cannot obtain. Military options are evaluated and quietly discarded. There is no target to strike without consequence, no hostile action to justify escalation. Every doctrine humanity has developed assumes intent precedes restraint. Here, restraint comes first, and that inversion paralyzes decision-making. How do you respond to something that hasn't done anything wrong, but has made it clear it could? The presence above cities changes behavior without force. People walk differently. They look up more often. Large gatherings feel risky, not because of threat, but because of attention. Being seen becomes uncomfortable. Humanity, for the first time, experiences itself as a subject rather than an observer. The psychological shift is profound. We are no longer the ones watching the universe. The universe is watching us. Children ask questions adults cannot answer. Why are they there? What do they want? Are they watching me? Parents offer reassurances they don't believe themselves. Schools remain open, but lessons feel abstract. History classes feel unfinished. Science textbooks feel outdated. The future, once a place of ambition, becomes a place of uncertainty. And still, nothing happens. No ultimatum, no demand, no declaration, just continued observation, continuous presence, perfect patience. The fear this creates is more corrosive than violence ever could be. Violence unites people against a common threat. Observation turns them inward. It forces humanity to confront itself, its divisions, its beliefs, its fragility, without an external enemy to blame. Some begin to hope the observers will intervene. Fix the climate. End war. Correct mistakes humanity has failed to solve on its own. Others fear that this hope itself is dangerous, that waiting for rescue is another form of surrender. The debate grows louder, then more bitter. The presence above does not respond. It records. This is Alex Mercer, and perhaps the most unsettling realization of all is this. Nothing suggests humanity is being punished. Nothing suggests we are being saved. Everything suggests we are being evaluated, not as individuals, not as nations, but as a species, observed in moments of fear, faith, denial, cooperation, and collapse. The world has not ended. It has been noticed. And tonight, as those structures remain suspended above land and sea, silent and unmoving, the question is no longer whether we are alone in the universe. The question is whether we are being judged, and whether we even understand the criteria. This is Alex Mercer, and tonight we arrive at the moment when uncertainty stops feeling abstract. Not with fire, not with sound, not with destruction, but with something far more disturbing. Silence. Somewhere in the world, without warning and without explanation, an entire metropolitan area simply goes quiet. There is no flash captured by satellites, no shockwave, no plume of smoke rising into the sky. The city does not collapse. Buildings remain standing. Lights remain on. Power grids show stable output. From orbit, everything looks intact, preserved, almost frozen in time. But from everywhere else, from phones, radios, networks, and data lines, there is nothing. No signals leave, no signals enter. The city does not respond. It does not call for help. It does not acknowledge the outside world at all. At first, analysts assume a communications blackout, a cyber event, a cascading infrastructure failure. But those explanations fall apart quickly. Redundant systems fail simultaneously across unrelated technologies. Fiber, cellular, satellite uplinks, emergency frequencies, everything goes dead at once. Not degraded, not jammed, gone. As if the city has been cut cleanly out of the global nervous system. Attempts to reach the city fail uniformly. Aircraft are diverted before they can approach. Drones sent to observe lose signal at the same invisible boundary and return on automated fail-safes, their last transmitted images showing nothing unusual. Empty streets, stalled vehicles, pedestrians mid-stride. No signs of struggle, no visible damage, just stillness. And then comes the detail that no one can explain. Nothing inside the city moves. Traffic cameras freeze on scenes that should be temporary. Cars stopped at intersections, people standing on sidewalks, trains halted between stations. Hours pass, then days. The positions do not change. Power consumption remains steady but unvarying, like a heartbeat locked into a loop. Water systems show pressure but no flow variation. It is as if time itself has been instructed to pause, but only within a perfectly defined perimeter. There is no declaration, no acknowledgement from the structures watching overhead, no warning message transmitted before or after. The city is not destroyed, it is not conquered, it is removed from participation. Panic spreads, not explosively, but methodically. Other cities begin checking themselves compulsively. Emergency drills are initiated, then abandoned when no protocol fits. What do you do when the threat is not death, but disappearance? When survival is not the worst outcome? And then, quietly, a realization begins to take shape in rooms that were never meant to hold it. Military leaders, intelligence analysts, and strategists across the world compare notes and find nothing that resembles war. No escalation, no territorial expansion, no attempt to neutralize defenses or eliminate leadership. The silent city was not a strike. It was not a message in the way humans understand messages. It was a demonstration of capabilities without hostility. This force does not behave like an enemy. It behaves like a system. Systems do not hate. They do not threaten. They do not seek dominance or surrender. They execute processes. They isolate variables. They observe outcomes. The silent city begins to look less like a target and more like a sample. That conclusion chills every room it enters. If this were war, humanity would understand its role. Opponent, defender, victim, combatant. But if this is a process, then humanity is not an adversary. It is input, behavior to be measured, reactions to be cataloged, patterns to be evaluated. The observers did not choose a capital. They did not choose a military hub. They chose a city that represented complexity, population density, infrastructure interdependence, cultural diversity. A place where millions of lives intersected in fragile, human ways. The selection appears deliberate, but not punitive. Almost curious. What frightens commanders most is restraint. Total capability is displayed, then withheld. The system does not expand its action. It does not repeat the event elsewhere. It simply leaves the silent city as it is, untouched, unreachable, and unresolved. A standing question mark embedded in reality. From that moment on, global cooperation begins to unravel. At first, the fractures are subtle. Delayed information sharing, sanitized reports, data streams labeled inconclusive that once would have been openly exchanged. Nations grow cautious about what they reveal, not out of malice, but out of fear that transparency itself is now a vulnerability. Knowledge feels dangerous when you don't know who else is listening. Alliances strain under the weight of uncertainty. Mutual defense agreements assume identifiable threats and shared understanding. Neither exists anymore. Trust erodes quietly, replaced by hedging and contingency planning. Joint operations are postponed. Shared surveillance feeds are restricted. Humanity, faced with something beyond its comprehension, does not unite. It retracts. Each nation prepares alone. Borders harden, not against invasion, but against dependence. Supply chains are reconsidered. Foreign technology is scrutinized. Independent communication networks are rushed into development, many of them redundant, incompatible, or doomed to fail. Cooperation, once born of shared confidence, collapses into isolation, born of fear. Even language begins to diverge. Governments describe the events differently to their populations. Some emphasize caution, others deny significance. A few hint at destiny or inevitability or adaptation. The absence of a shared narrative becomes its own crisis. Humanity cannot agree on what is happening, only that it is no longer in control. And above it all, the observers remain. They do not interfere with the fracture. They do not correct misinformation. They do not respond to isolation. If anything, the breakdown of cooperation appears to be another data point, another outcome recorded without judgment. The system does not reward unity or punish division. It simply notes what happens. The silent city remains unchanged. No decay, no recovery, no movement. Time does not appear to resume. It exists as a permanent reminder, not of destruction, but of contingency. Proof that reality itself can be selectively suspended, and that nothing humanity has built is as fundamental as it believed. People stop asking when the city will come back. They start asking whether any city is guaranteed to remain. This is Alex Mercer, and perhaps the most sobering truth to emerge from all of this is not that humanity is weak, but that it may never have been the central actor it assumed itself to be. We are not facing an enemy that wants our land, our resources, or our surrender. We are facing something that does not require our consent at all. And tonight, as nations turn inward, alliances fade, and one city remains perfectly silent under an indifferent sky, humanity is learning a lesson it has never had to confront before. When cooperation is hardest, it is also when it matters most. And when fear wins, no external force needs to finish the job. Because the process continues, whether we face it together or not. For weeks, scientists searched for patterns that centered on us. Our cities, our weapons, our communications, our reactions. Every model assumed humanity was the subject of the operation, that we were being tested, judged, or prepared for something. But eventually, the data refused to cooperate with that assumption. The correlations didn't line up. Human behavior changed wildly from region to region, yet the activity above remained consistent. Cities panicked or adapted, worshipped or denied, cooperated or fractured, and none of it altered the process unfolding around the planet. What did remain consistent was Earth itself. Gravitational anomalies detected near the massive structures follow planetary patterns, not population density. Biological sampling, quietly inferred from atmospheric disturbances and unexplained shifts in microbial behavior, aligns with ecosystems, not borders. Energy extraction or manipulation appears localized to tectonic boundaries, magnetic field concentrations, and oceanic systems humanity barely understands. The conclusion, when it finally emerges, feels almost embarrassing in its simplicity. We were never the target. The operation does not revolve around humanity any more than mining operations on Earth revolve around the ants beneath the soil. Ants may react. Ants may scatter. Ants may suffer. But the objective remains the ground itself. Scientists begin to speak carefully, choosing words that minimize panic while acknowledging truth. Earth, its gravity, its chemistry, its living systems, or its position in space, may be the resource. The structures above are not watching us to decide our fate. They are monitoring us the way weather is monitored during construction. Humanity is collateral, not because it is hated, but because it is incidental. This realization lands unevenly across the world. Some feel relief. If we are not the enemy, then perhaps annihilation is not imminent. Others feel something colder than fear, insignificance. The idea that the greatest intelligence humanity has ever encountered does not consider us worth confronting directly erodes something fundamental. We have always defined ourselves as central, as the narrators of Earth's story. Tonight, that story is being revised without our input. And then comes the second realization, quieter, heavier, and far more permanent. Decisions affecting Earth are no longer being made by humans. There is no announcement of takeover, no declaration of authority, no visible transfer of power. And yet, systems begin to fail in ways that cannot be fixed, not because they are broken, but because they are overridden. Satellites adjust orbits without command. Power grids reroute themselves away from human priorities. Climate interventions occur without international consensus. Environmental conditions shift in localized, deliberate ways that ignore economic consequence entirely. Nothing is destroyed. Nothing is conquered. Humanity simply stops being the highest-level decision-maker. Engineers describe the experience as working inside a system where their permissions have been downgraded. Controls still exist, but they no longer matter. Overrides cannot be overridden. Attempts to regain authority do not trigger retaliation. They are ignored, like background noise. The world continues to function, but it no longer responds exclusively to human intention. This is not defeat in any historical sense. No war is lost. No capital falls. No surrender is signed. Humanity remains alive, technologically capable, culturally active. But dominance, the quiet assumption that human intelligence is the final arbiter of Earth's future, expires without ceremony. We do not lose the planet. We lose authorship. Children born during this transition will never know a world where the sky was empty. They grow up seeing the structures overhead the way previous generations saw clouds or stars, present, immense, and beyond influence. They ask fewer questions than adults expect. Adaptation comes naturally to those without memory of control. Schools adjust curricula. History classes quietly redefine the Anthropocene as a closed chapter rather than a living one. Cities change shape, not because anyone forces them to, but because people begin anticipating observation. Streets empty earlier, lights dim voluntarily, noise fades at night without laws enforcing it. No curfews exist, yet everyone obeys them. Behavior shifts not under threat, but under awareness. Being seen changes how people live, even when nothing follows the seeing. The sky becomes occupied, but not hostile. The structures remain overhead, over oceans, deserts, and strategic regions of planetary importance. They do not multiply endlessly. They do not advance into population centers. They hold position, adjusting slowly as Earth changes beneath them. Life continues under their shadow. Weddings happen, music plays, arguments persist. Humanity survives, but altered in posture, in confidence, in expectation. Religion evolves again. Some faiths interpret this as stewardship reassigned. Others see it as proof of a hierarchy beyond human morality. New philosophies emerge that reject dominance entirely, embracing the idea that intelligence does not imply ownership. For the first time in history, humility becomes more than a virtue. It becomes a survival trait. And perhaps the most unsettling change of all is this: fear begins to fade. Not because the situation improves, but because it stabilizes. The observers do not escalate. The process continues. Earth remains habitable. Humanity adapts. What once felt like occupation begins to feel like environment. The presence becomes background. Normal. This is how dominance ends, not with resistance, not with extinction, but with relevance slowly redistributed. The world still turns, seasons still change, children still grow. But decisions that once belonged to us alone now happen above us, beyond us, according to logic we do not control and may never fully understand. This is Alex Mercer, and tonight's truth is not that humanity has failed, but that it has been contextualized. We were never the center of the system. We were a component within it, briefly empowered by circumstance and time. The sky is no longer empty. The planet is no longer exclusively ours, and life goes on, not because we command it to, but because the system allows it. And under an occupied sky, humanity learns, slowly, unevenly, and permanently, what it means to live without being the dominant intelligence. On its own world, across every surviving network, whispered in private homes and spoken carefully in scientific briefings, the same uncertainty persists. The structures remain motionless. The systems continue their work. Earth is stable, altered, monitored, no longer solely ours, but intact. And yet nothing concludes, nothing escalates, nothing finishes. The process does not announce its end. It simply continues, which leaves humanity facing the most psychologically corrosive possibility of all, that this is not an occupation, not an extraction, not a takeover, but a waiting state. Are they waiting for something to happen to the planet? Or are they waiting for something to happen to us? This question fractures experts and philosophers alike. Some argue the structures are observing long-term adaptation, how an intelligent species behaves once it is no longer dominant. Others suggest a developmental threshold, that humanity is being assessed not by technology, but by restraint, cooperation, or capacity to coexist under superior intelligence without self-destruction. There are darker theories, too, that we are irrelevant entirely, that waiting is simply the natural duration of a planetary-scale operation, and that our anxiety is noise in a system too vast to notice it. What makes the question unbearable is not fear, but ambiguity, a threat you can resist, a command you can obey. But waiting without criteria erodes meaning itself. Time passes differently now, not because clocks have stopped, but because direction has blurred. Humanity no longer measures progress by expansion or conquest, but by preservation, of memory, of identity, of continuity. The future is no longer imagined as something we build, but something we are permitted to experience. And in that psychological shift, something ancient stirs, the need to be remembered, even if influence is gone. Which is why this broadcast exists. not as resistance, not as defiance, not as a plea, but as testimony. Somewhere within the remaining infrastructure, quiet, shielded, and still functioning, a decision is made. If humanity cannot determine what comes next, then it can at least leave a record of what was. Not a mythologized version, not a triumphant narrative, but an honest account, preserved in language, tone, and uncertainty. A record not meant for allies or enemies, but for whoever or whatever may listen in the future. This transmission is not sent upward. It is not aimed at the structures in the sky. It is archived, duplicated, scattered across frequencies and formats that may outlast us. Stone, code, signal, and memory. A message written not with the expectation of reply, but with the hope of recognition. It documents who we were before relevance faded. We speak of our contradictions openly, our capacity for beauty and cruelty, our relentless curiosity paired with profound short-sightedness. We describe a species capable of art that could stop wars, yet rarely did. A species that mapped the stars while poisoning its own oceans, that dreamed of unity while fragmenting itself at every opportunity. This record does not ask forgiveness. It offers context. We talk about love, not as sentiment, but as behavior, about families, friendships, loyalty, and sacrifice, about how meaning was never found in dominance, even when we pretended otherwise, about how our greatest moments came not from control, but from connection. These details matter, not because they justify us, but because they define us. This may be the last purely human record, not because humanity will vanish tomorrow, but because humanity has already changed. Future generations will grow up under a sky that is no longer symbolic, no longer mysterious in the old way. They will not remember the silence before the presence. Their thoughts will be shaped by observation, by coexistence, by limits that feel natural rather than imposed. They will still be human, but not this kind of human. This broadcast captures the moment before that transition fully settles. The voice may tremble, not with fear, but with awareness. That something essential is closing. Not life, not civilization, but an era in which humanity believed itself alone at the top of the hierarchy. An era in which the future felt owned rather than borrowed. We acknowledge the unknown openly. We do not claim to understand the watchers above. We do not project morality onto them, because morality may not apply at their scale. We state only what we know. They arrived without warning, reshaped authority without violence, and altered the trajectory of an entire species without ever needing to speak. And then we ask, not them, but history itself, to remember that we noticed, that we questioned, that we reflected, that we did not disappear quietly into irrelevance without first trying to understand what that meant. If this record is ever found, by descendants, by observers, or by intelligences not yet imagined, let it be known that humanity did not end in panic. It paused. It adapted. It learned humility the hard way, and in that humility, perhaps, it became something closer to what it always claimed to be. This is Alex Mercer, and if this is the last time a human voice speaks without knowing who truly listens, then let it be said clearly, calmly, and without defiance. We were here. We were aware. We were imperfect. And we tried to understand our place when the universe finally answered back. Whatever comes next, dash, dash. whether they are waiting for us or waiting for something else entirely. This is our witness. This is Alex Mercer. Tonight, we spoke not of endings, but of presence, of silence that shapes us, of skies that watch, and of a world we no longer fully command. Remember this moment, not for fear, but for what it teaches. That even when we are no longer at the center, we still exist. We still observe. We still matter in ways we may never understand. And so, for however long this signal carries, let it be a testament. Humanity was here, and we saw. Good night.